When he got the call from the duty officer, Major Fournet called Lieutenant Holcomb. They drove to the ARTC radar room at National Airport and found Al Chop already there. So at this performance, the UFOs had an official audience. Al Chop, Major Dewey Fournet, and Lieutenant Holcomb, a Navy electronics specialist assigned to the Air Force Directorate of Intelligence, all saw the radar targets and heard the radio conversations as jets tried to intercept the UFOs. Being in Dayton, 380 miles away, there wasn't much that I could do, but I did call Captain Roy James, thinking possibly he might want to talk on the phone to the people who were watching the UFOs on the radar scopes. But Captain James has a powerful dislike for UFOs, especially on Saturday night. About 5 o'clock Sunday morning, Major Fournet called and told me the story of the second sighting at Washington National Airport. About 10:30 p.m. on July 26th, the same radar operators who had seen the UFOs the week before picked up several of the same slow-moving targets. This time, the mysterious craft, if that is what they were spread out from Herndon, Virginia to Andrews Air Force Base. This time, there was no hesitation in following the targets. The minute they appeared on the big 24-inch radar scope, one of the controllers placed a plastic marker representing an unidentified target near each blip on the scope. When all the targets had been carefully marked, one of the controllers called the tower and the radar station at Andrews Air Force Base. They also had the unknown targets. By 11:30 p.m., 4 or 5 of the targets were continually being tracked at all times, so once again a call went out for jet interceptors. Once again there was some delay, but by midnight, 2 F-94s from Newcastle County Air Force Base were airborne and headed south. The reporters and photographers were asked to leave the radar room on the pretext that classified radio frequencies and procedures were being used in vectoring the interceptors. All civilian air traffic was cleared out of the area and the jets moved in. When I later found out that the press had been dismissed on the grounds that the procedures used in an intercept were classified, I knew that this was absurd, because any ham radio operator worth his salt could build equipment and listen in on any intercept. The real reason for the press dismissal, I learned, was that not a few people in the radar room were positive that this night would be the big night in UFO history. The night when a pilot would close in on and get a good look at a UFO, and they didn't want the press to be in on it. But just as the 294s arrived in the area, the targets disappeared from the radar scopes. The 2 jets were vectored into the areas where the radar had shown the last target plots, but even though the visibility was excellent, they could see nothing. The 2 airplanes stayed around a few minutes more, made a systematic search of the area, but since they still couldn't see anything or pick up anything on their radars, they returned to their base. A few minutes after the F-94s left the Washington area, the unidentified targets were back on the radar scopes in that same area. What neither Major Fournet nor I knew at this time was that a few minutes after the targets left the radar scopes in Washington, people in the area around Langley Air Force Base near Newport News, Virginia, began to call Langley Tower to report that they were looking at weird, bright lights that were rotating and giving off alternating colors. A few minutes after the calls began to come in, the tower operators themselves saw the same or a similar light, and they called for an interceptor. An F-94 in the area was contacted and visually vectored to the light by the tower operators. The F-94 saw the light and started toward it, but suddenly it went out, like somebody turning off a light bulb. The F-94 crew continued their run and soon got a radar lock-on, but it was broken in a few seconds as the target apparently sped away. The fighter stayed in the area for several more minutes and got 2 more lock-ons, only to have them also broken after a few seconds. A few minutes after the F-94 over Newport News had the last lock-on broken, the targets came back on the scopes at Washington National. With the targets back at Washington, the traffic controllers again called Air Defense Command, and once again 2 F-94s roared south toward Washington. This time the targets stayed on the radar scopes when the airplanes arrived. The controllers vectored the jets toward group after group of targets, but each time, before the jets could get close enough to see anything more than just a light, the targets had sped away. Then one stayed put. The pilot saw a light right where the ARTC radar said a target was located. He cut in the F-94's afterburner and went after it. But just like the light that the F-94 had chased near Langley Air Force Base, this one also disappeared. All during the chase, the radar operator in the F-94 was trying to get the target on his set, but he had no luck. After staying in the area about 20 minutes, the jets began to run low on fuel and returned to their base. Minutes later, it began to get light, and when the sun came up, all the targets were gone. Early Sunday morning, in an interview with the press, the Korean veteran who piloted the F-94, Lieutenant William Patterson, said, "I tried to make contact with the bogies below 1,000 feet, but they, the radar controllers, vectored us around. I saw several bright lights. I was at my maximum speed, but even then I had no closing speed. I ceased chasing them because I saw no chance of overtaking them. I was vectored into new objects. Later, I chased a single bright light which I estimated about 10 miles away. I lost visual contact with it about 2 miles." When Major Fournet finished telling me about the night's activity, my first question was, "How about the radar targets? Could they have been caused by weather?" I knew that Lieutenant Holcomb was a sharp electronics man, and that Major Fournet, although no electronics specialist, was a crackerjack engineer, so their opinion meant a lot. Dewey said that everybody in the radar room was convinced that the targets were very probably caused by solid metallic objects. There had been weather targets on the scope too, he said, but these were common to the Washington area and the controllers were paying no attention. Something solid could poke along at 100 miles an hour or outdistance a jet, I thought to myself. I didn't ask Dewey anymore because he'd been up all night and wanted to get to bed. Monday morning, Major Ed Gregory, another intelligence officer at ATIC, and I left for Washington, but our flight was delayed in Dayton, so we didn't arrive until late afternoon. On the way through the terminal building to get a cab downtown, I picked up the evening papers. Every headline was about the UFOs. "Fiery objects outrun jets over Capitol. Investigation veiled in secrecy following vain chase. Jets alerted for saucers. Interceptors chase lights in D.C. skies. Experts here to push study as objects in skies reported again." I jokingly commented about wondering who the expert was. In a half hour, I found out. I was. When Major Gregory and I walked into the lobby of the Roger Smith Hotel to check in, reporters and photographers rose from the easy chairs and divans like a covey of quail. They wanted my secrets, but I wasn't going to tell, nor would I pose for pictures while I wasn't telling anything. Newspaper reporters are a determined lot, but Greg ran interference and we reached the elevator without even a no comment. The next day was one of confusion. After the first Washington sightings, the prevailing air in the section of the Pentagon's fourth floor, which is occupied by Air Force intelligence, could be described as excitement, but this day it was confusion. There was a maximum of talk and a minimum of action. Everyone agreed that both sightings should be thoroughly investigated, but nobody did anything. Major Fournet and I spent the entire evening just leaving for somewhere to investigate something. Every time we would start to leave, something more pressing would come up. About 10 o'clock a.m., the President's air aide, Brigadier General Landry, called intelligence at President Truman's request to find out what was going on. Somehow, I got the call. I told General Landry that the radar target could have been caused by weather, but that we had no proof. To add to the already confused situation, new UFO reports were coming in hourly. We kept them quiet mainly because we weren't able to investigate them right away, or even confirm the facts. And we wanted to confirm the facts because some of the reports, even though they were from military sources, were difficult to believe. Prior to the Washington sightings, in only a very few of the many instances in which radar had picked up UFO targets, had the targets themselves supposedly been seen visually. Radar experts had continually pointed out this fact to us as an indication that maybe all of the radar targets were caused by freak weather conditions. If people had just seen a light or an object near where the radar showed the UFO target to be, you would have a lot more to worry about, radar technicians had told me many times. Now, people were seeing the same targets that the radars were picking up, and not just at Washington. On the same night as the second Washington sighting, we had a really good report from California. An ADC radar had picked up an unidentified target, and an F-94C had been scrambled. The radar vectored the jet interceptor into the target, the radar operator in the 94 locked onto it, and as the airplane closed in, the pilot and RO saw that they were headed directly toward a large, yellowish-orange light. For several minutes they played tag with the UFO. Both the radar on the ground and the radar in the F-94 showed that as soon as the airplane would get almost within gunnery range of the UFO, it would suddenly pull away at a terrific speed. Then in a minute or two, it would slow down enough to let the F-94 catch it again. When I talked to the F-94 crew on the phone, the pilot said that they felt as if this were just a big aerial cat-and-mouse game, and they didn't like it. At any moment, they thought the cat might have pounced. Needless to say, this was an unknown. About mid-morning on Tuesday, July 29th, Major General John Samford sent word down that he would hold a press conference that afternoon in an attempt to straighten out